My mother-in-law and sister-in-law wove a web of vicious lies about me, turning my husband against me so completely that he didn't even bother to hear my side of the story before throwing me out of our home, leaving me heartbroken, betrayed, and desperate to uncover the truth and reclaim my dignity. I was treated terribly by my husband and his family for months. I eventually escaped that toxic environment, but they tried to come back and hurt me again. I'm proud to say that I stood up for myself and my baby daughter. I met my ex, Jack, when I was 38 and living in France. I was in my 20s, half Canadian and French, and Jack is American. He was working on his PhD while I was living with family and interning as a photographer for a local newspaper. We met by chance at his university, and I was immediately impressed by how charming and smart he was. A mutual friend introduced us, and after months of hanging out in groups, I finally gathered the courage to ask him out. He said yes, and one date led to another until we became a couple. Looking back on those days feels surreal, almost like a different life, because everything changed and my husband went from the brilliant, funny guy I loved to a cold, selfish man. Our relationship began wonderfully. We dated for almost a year before moving in together. After 2 years under one roof, Jack finished his PhD and had to return to the States. We knew this day would come and had discussed the possibility of me joining him. Being originally from Canada, I had planned to leave France earlier, but when Jack and I got serious, I extended my stay until his PhD was done. I wish I could go back and tell myself to stick to my plans, but life had other ideas. In the end, Jack proposed, and I left behind my family and work in France, as well as my family in Canada, to move to the States with him. I was young, in love, and believed that Jack would do the same for me if needed. I was really hopeful about our future, but things started to unravel quickly after our move. When we first arrived in the States, Jack and I didn't have a place to live. This was also my first time in the US. To make things easier until we found our own home, we moved in with Jack's family, which turned out to be a terrible idea. Jack's family included his mom, his sister, her young daughter, and his older brother. My brother-in-law, who lived far away with his wife, was a kind man, though I only met him once. I wish I could say the same for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but my luck was not with me during those early months. We lived at his mom's house, and my sister-in-law, Julia, was there too because she had just divorced and needed help with her daughter. I knew about this before moving in, and I didn't mind since I grew up in a large family. I thought more people would mean more support. However, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were cold towards me right from the start. They weren't openly cruel, but their behavior was always insincere and passive-aggressive. For the first few weeks, I even wondered if I was imagining it because they were polite to my face. But as time went on, it became clear they didn't like me. I hoped they might warm up as they got to know me, but they never did. Eventually, I told Jack how I felt, and his response only confused me further. He insisted it was all in my head and claimed his mom and sister actually loved me, blaming it on cultural differences since I'd only known Canada and France. I wasn't convinced, yet I tried harder to befriend them, though nothing changed. After about 3 months, Jack and I finally found our own place. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were not happy about us leaving and even suggested we could stay until we got married. I was completely against that idea and convinced Jack to move out. That decision only increased their coldness toward me, and I couldn't think of any other reason for their behavior. By that point, I had accepted that we might only ever have a civil relationship. Jack and I moved into a small but nice apartment. He secured a teaching job while I started searching for work. We still saw his mom and sister regularly since they lived nearby, and we often had family dinners together. I tolerated those evenings for a few hours, but they always left me feeling uneasy. Not long after we moved out, I discovered I was 3 weeks pregnant. We hadn't planned to have a baby so soon and had even postponed our wedding until we were more financially secure, but I was delighted by the news. Jack was excited too, even saying that maybe this baby was a sign that better times were coming. We had a small courthouse wedding, and I even hoped that having a baby might finally warm my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to me. Instead, things went in the opposite direction. Our first major fight broke out when I first learned about my pregnancy. Jack and I planned to surprise them with our baby's first ultrasound, framed cutely. We were waiting in the living room while my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were out shopping, but they unexpectedly walked in. My sister-in-law mocked me using a terrible French accent, claiming I acted superior because I was from Europe, and my mother-in-law said other harsh things. I burst into tears, and Jack, red-faced, rushed out to confront them. The confrontation turned nasty, and eventually, Jack and I stormed out of that house. We didn't have any contact for several months, and I thought that was the end of it. Around 5 months into my pregnancy, my mother-in-law called Jack to apologize and asked him to come over and talk. I didn't want to go, but Jack did. I don't know what was said, but when he returned, he seemed off. I tried to get him to open up, but he was standoffish. I assumed he might have had another fight with his mom and sister, so I gave him space, hoping he'd return to his old self. However, he continued acting strangely for about a week. Finally, I had enough and confronted him. At first, he denied everything, but after I pressed him, he snapped and admitted that his family had told him everything. I was baffled and asked him to clarify what he meant. He replied that I should stop lying and claimed he knew exactly how I felt. More confusion and nagging from my side ensued, and then he mentioned that his sister had overheard me telling my mom one day that I hated living in the US with Jack's family. Apparently, I had also said that I despised his mom and sister because they were dirty rednecks. I was shocked. I would never say that to anyone, especially not family. Sure, I had vented to my relatives about struggling to adjust in the States, but I never insulted anyone, nor did I think I was being overheard. I tried to get Jack to understand my side, but he was convinced that his mom and sister would never lie to him and insisted that I apologize to them. This led to a massive fight, culminating in him storming out of our apartment. I had a breakdown. It was my first pregnancy, and things were already tough. This was the last straw. I stayed up all night waiting for him, but he never returned. I eventually fell asleep and woke up to a text from him in the afternoon, saying he'd only come back when I apologized. At that point, I had had enough. I needed to confront him, so I pretended I was ready to apologize. Within an hour, he arrived with his mom and sister, looking infuriatingly smug. Once they sat down in the living room, I exploded, ranting and yelling about everything they had put me through since I moved in. The confrontation escalated as my sister-in-law and mother-in-law began calling me a liar, accusing me of having a plan to take Jack to Europe, and even calling me a nasty foreigner. I was utterly confused. I looked to Jack for support, asking if he was going to back me up, but he simply looked away and suggested that maybe I should leave the apartment for a while. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but my pride kicked in. I was done with the endless emotional abuse and lies. I packed a few things and checked into a hotel. I called my parents and decided to return to Canada to be with them during my pregnancy. I also divorced Jack as soon as possible. Luckily, the process was smooth since neither of us wanted to remain together any longer. Months passed, and thankfully, I welcomed a beautiful baby girl a month ago. But here's the twist. A few weeks after my daughter's birth, Jack sent me a letter demanding that I return his daughter because he wanted her to live with him and his mom. This enraged me. After all the pain they had inflicted, they had the nerve to demand my child. There was no way I was going to let them take my daughter away. I considered going back to the States to confront them in person, but my parents and friends advised me to let our lawyers handle it instead. I kept rereading the letter, and my anger only grew until I finally booked a flight to the United States to face Jack and his family head-on. I had no doubt that the confrontation wouldn't be easy. Jack, along with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, sat in the living room with a palpable air of arrogance. They seemed to believe they could continue controlling my life despite all the hurt they'd caused. Overwhelmed with anger, I grabbed the custody demand letter from my bag and tore it to shreds right in front of them. Their shocked expressions filled me with a sense of empowerment. I was reclaiming control over my life and my child's future. I made it clear that I would sue all of them for the emotional abuse I endured during my pregnancy, a time when I was left practically stranded without any financial help after being kicked out. I told Jack that he would never take my daughter from me, especially since she is a Canadian citizen. If they were willing to fight a legal battle to win her, then so be it. The look of shock on their faces was priceless. I don't think they ever expected me to become this assertive. Jack stammered as he tried to defend his family's actions, insisting that they only wanted what was best for him and our baby. I had had enough of that nonsense. I knew they had manipulated him with their twisted tales about me, and when he started spouting off about his rights as a father, I shot back that he wasn't even a real father, and I was certain the courts would agree with me. I also threatened to expose their entire family on social media, revealing how they treated a pregnant woman new to the country, a move I knew would upset his employers. I made it crystal clear, I would never play their games or apologize for something I never said. The emotional abuse I had suffered was real, and I wasn't about to subject my daughter to that toxic environment. I was fully prepared to take legal action to protect her, and I wasn't afraid to do so. I also knew Jack wouldn't meet the necessary criteria to win custody, so that wasn't a worry either. My words were met with a mix of anger, disbelief, and frustration from Jack and his family. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law started screaming that marrying me was the worst decision Jack had ever made and claimed they always knew I was vindictive and evil. I simply laughed and told them I was sorry. They had nothing better to do than to villainize a woman who had never wronged them. Their shocked silence told me they had expected me to back down or to act like the submissive person I once was in the early months of my pregnancy, but that woman was gone for good. I stormed out of that house and began the legal process to protect my rights as a mother and terminate Jack's parental rights. I consulted with lawyers in both Canada and the US. It hasn't been easy, but I'm determined to prove that I am the best parent for my child. I refuse to let Jack or his family take that away from me. This is just the beginning, and it might take a while. I'll keep you all updated. Jack later reached out several times, arguing that it was unfair to take his daughter away simply because our relationship fell apart. He insisted that I let him have some access to our little girl's life and promised to stay out of my business if I agreed to his terms. Meanwhile, his mom and sister kept insisting that I was a horrible mother for keeping my daughter away from her father. In my view, a coward like him doesn't deserve any part in our daughter's life. Update 1. Thank you so much for all your advice and kind words. Honestly, it means the world to me. I was just venting online because those closest to me have seen everything evolve from the start, and I didn't want to bore anyone or give the impression that this was all I ever talk about. Your supportive messages truly mean everything, and it warms my heart to receive DMs from women who faced similar hardships and managed to protect themselves and their children. I'm reading all your comments. Even if I can't reply to each one, please know I'm deeply grateful. A lot of you have been asking about my relationship with Jack and why everything suddenly changed after I moved to the States. Honestly, I'm still figuring it out. I suspect that our lifestyle in France was so different that maybe Jack didn't realize how much things would shift here. Plus, he wasn't thrilled about the pregnancy, which made it all too easy for his mom and sister to influence him. Why they never liked me is still a mystery. They wanted an all-American girl for Jack, and maybe I was just too foreign for their taste. My mom says my sister-in-law might have been jealous, but I think she only says that to help me feel better. In hindsight, I should have spotted the red flags in Jack's behavior sooner. He kept insisting that I was misreading his mom and sister's dismissive actions, calling my feelings manipulative. Lesson learned, I guess. And yes, I was unemployed in the States while job hunting until I discovered I was pregnant and decided to take a break until after the baby arrived. It's crazy. I uprooted my whole life and career for a man I loved, and he couldn't even stand up for me when it really mattered. Absolutely disgusting and pathetic. The good news is I now have a great job with a magazine, and more importantly, I know I can never risk my career like that again. Update 2. Hey everyone still following along. I've gotten tons of DMs and comments asking what happened. Sorry for the delay. So much was going on that I barely had time to update, and it's been nearly 8 months since my last post. For those still interested, I want to share that after a long struggle, Jack now has no rights over my daughter. During the legal battle, I was hit with a barrage of false accusations and attempts to discredit me. Jack's family spared no effort in painting me as an unfit mother, using every lie and manipulation trick in the book. I was ready for their tactics, though I had evidence to counter their claims while all they had were baseless words. It's crazy that they even dragged this into court. I know my mother-in-law pushed Jack to this point. The emotional toll of the legal fight was immense. I had to constantly work to stay calm and focused on what mattered most, my child's well-being. I'm so grateful for my family and friends who stuck by me. Their unwavering belief gave me the strength to keep going. The evidence of emotional abuse and manipulation was undeniable, and the judge recognized the toxic environment created by Jack's family. It was a bittersweet victory knowing that my child's safety was the priority. In the end, the court ruled in my favor, granting me full custody. That moment of triumph and relief meant I could now give my child a loving, stable home. I'm sharing this story because I've finally secured my daughter's future and hope it can help any other moms in a similar situation. Thank you for reading. Update 3. Some of you have asked about the evidence I used against Jack in court. It was a long, complicated, and emotionally draining process, not something I'd recommend to the faint-hearted. I did what I had to do, and luckily, the circumstances were on my side. I kept text messages from my early months of pregnancy, conversations with my friends and mom where I talked about how my mother-in-law and sister-in-law made me feel. But the most crucial piece was a recording of the argument with Jack's mom and sister right before they kicked me out of the apartment. I had mentioned before that I talked to friends about Jack storming out, and many advised me to confront him immediately. One friend even suggested I record the entire interaction, just in case they later denied their mistreatment. I'm so glad I took her advice. Also, the fact that Jack kicked me out when I was vulnerable and then had no contact throughout my pregnancy, or even at the birth of my daughter, said a lot about his character. Plus, none of my daughter's legal documents list him as her father, which really worked in my favor. Deep down, I knew that guy might try to come between me and my daughter. I'm incredibly thankful for my amazing lawyers who fought for both of us. Frankly, Jack was a terrible partner and an even worse father. Although the legal process took forever and cost a lot, I trusted that the court would see I was the better parent and wouldn't take my daughter away. Many of you have also asked if I plan to tell my daughter about Jack. Right now, she's too young for that discussion, and I don't have any solid plans yet. When she's older, I promise I'll be honest about what happened. For now, I have a happy, healthy baby girl surrounded by loving grandparents, aunts, and uncles. She never misses out on love. I do wish she could have grown up with her dad, but I'm determined to be the best mom and ensure she never feels abandoned. I haven't been in contact with Jack, and I don't plan to ever. My daughter is thriving, and I've even started dating someone new, taking it slow, which is exactly how I want things now that my life is finally stable. Thanks again for all your love, support, and for patiently reading along. As time passed, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. My daughter grew into the happiest, most curious little girl, and every day, she reminded me why I had fought so hard to protect her. Watching her take her first steps, hearing her first words, and seeing her smile so effortlessly, it all made every struggle worth it. I no longer saw myself as a victim of my past, but as a survivor who had built something beautiful out of the chaos. My relationship with the new guy, Ethan, grew naturally and at a comfortable pace. He was patient, kind, and, most importantly, he respected the fact that my daughter and I were a package deal. He never tried to replace anyone in her life, but instead became a gentle, steady presence, one that she naturally gravitated toward. At first, I was hesitant to let anyone in, but over time, I realized he was different. He never rushed me, never made me feel like my past was baggage. He just accepted me for who I was. Meanwhile, Jack's family eventually stopped trying to interfere. After losing the court case, they must have realized they had no real power over me or my daughter. Jack never made another attempt to contact us, and honestly, that was for the best. I had already come to terms with the fact that he wasn't capable of being the father my daughter deserved. Instead of dwelling on what she was missing, I focused on giving her a life filled with love, support, and stability. Career-wise, things flourished. I got promoted at the magazine, and with that, I finally felt financially secure enough to stop living in survival mode. I started making plans, not just for my daughter, but for myself, too. We moved into a bigger home, one with a yard where she could play, a cozy little reading nook for me, and plenty of space for us to grow. One day, as I watched my daughter giggling in the backyard while Ethan played with her, I realized something. I had done it. I had built a life that was safe, happy, and mine. The pain of the past didn't define me anymore. It was part of my story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. I had feared for so long that I had lost everything when I left Jack, but the truth was, I had only lost what was never meant for me in the first place. And in return, I had gained something so much more, a future filled with love, hope, and freedom. That was the real ending. Not one where I looked back with regret, but one where I stepped forward, stronger than ever, with my daughter's hand in mine, ready for whatever came next.